I should tell you now, before I tell you how it started, that if you ever find tracks in the woods that look almost human, but too long, too narrow, too deep for the weight they should carry, turn around. Don't study them. Don't convince yourself there's a rational answer if your gut is already telling you something is wrong. I made that mistake. I kept following because I thought the worst thing waiting for me out there was a bear, or maybe some feral dog, maybe some old trespasser who didn't want company. I did not understand I was already being noticed. That part still wakes me up. Not the moment I saw it. The moment I realized it had probably seen me long before I ever found the first print. That is where the story really begins, though I didn't know it then. Back when I still thought the woods belonged to people in daylight. Back when I believed curiosity was harmless. Back when I could still laugh at myself. It started in late October, the kind of cold that doesn't feel serious until you stay still too long. My brother used to call it honest cold. It bit where your jacket opened and worked its way in. I was alone that afternoon, carrying a cheap pack, a half-empty bottle of water, and the kind of boredom that makes a man wander farther than he should. I'd been using the old logging trails for weeks, mostly to clear my head. Divorce will do strange things to a person. It makes silence feel louder, makes empty rooms unbearable. So I took to walking. Long walks, no destination, just dirt, pine, wind, things that didn't ask questions. There was an old service road beyond the marked trail system, barely visible under dead leaves. Most people ignored it because it led nowhere worth going. At least, that was the story. I liked it because it felt forgotten. There's a kind of comfort in forgotten places when you feel forgotten yourself. That afternoon I noticed the first track, near a patch of wet soil, where runoff crossed the road. At first I thought it was a barefoot print, which made no sense in that temperature. I crouched down and stared at it longer than I should have. 5 toes, long heel, but wrong somehow. Too stretched, the arch too pronounced. The depth bothered me most. It sank into the mud much deeper than my boot had. I remember pressing my own foot beside it to compare. Mine looked small, weak. I laughed under my breath. Actually laughed. Said out loud, "What the hell are you supposed to be?" That was the dry humor part of me, still alive then. There was another print 6 feet ahead. Then another. Not walking across the trail, following it. That should have been enough. But curiosity has a way of disguising itself as reason. I told myself maybe it was a prank. Maybe someone carved a fake foot. Maybe some local eccentric walked barefoot as some wilderness stunt. There is always an explanation if you need one badly enough. I followed. The trail narrowed until branches brushed my shoulders. Pine needles softened the ground, and the air changed, cooler, damper. I remember smelling rot under the usual earth smell, something old and sweet at the same time. It caught in my throat. I nearly turned back then, nearly. The tracks would vanish where the ground hardened, then reappear where moss or mud held shape. Each time I found them again, I felt a stupid little thrill, like solving a puzzle. I hate admitting that now, because part of me enjoyed it. About an hour in, I noticed the woods had gone quiet. You hear people say that, and it sounds dramatic, but silence in the forest has texture. You notice what's missing before you realize it's missing. No bird chatter, no squirrel rustling. Even the wind seemed lower, as if sound itself was ducking. I stopped moving, and for the first time, I had the feeling someone was standing just out of sight. Not a thought, a sensation, pressure. I turned slowly, scanning between trunks. Nothing but gray bark and long shadows. I told myself I was spooking myself. I started walking again, faster. That's when I found the deer, or what was left of it, It lay in a shallow depression beside a fallen tree, ribs open, body partly consumed. I had seen dead animals before, roadkill, hunting scraps. This was different. The neck looked twisted wrong. One hind leg was missing entirely. The ground around it was churned up in deep gouges, and beside those gouges, another print, fresh, the edges still wet. I felt cold in my teeth. I should have left right then. Anyone sane would have. Instead, I remember crouching again, studying that fresh track as if understanding it mattered more than getting away. That is the part I struggled to forgive in myself. Some broken part of me wanted answers more than safety. Then I heard a sound. 3 knocks. Wood on wood. Slow. Deliberate. Tock, tock, tock. Somewhere deeper in the trees. I froze so hard my knees hurt. There are sounds in the woods you can explain. Branch fall. Animal movement. Hunters tapping something. This did not feel like any of those. It felt placed. Directed. A message. I waited. Nothing. Then after maybe 10 seconds, 1 knock behind me. Closer. My stomach dropped so hard I thought I'd be sick. I spun around and saw nothing. But I know this sounds small, almost stupid, but one sapling was moving when the others weren't. Just a thin, young tree trembling on its own. I backed away, slowly at first, then faster. I didn't run, not yet, because running felt like admitting there was something to run from. The light had shifted while I'd been following the tracks. I hadn't realized how late it was getting. The woods were turning that bruised blue they get before dark. Every trunk looked taller. Every gap between trees looked occupied. I kept looking over my shoulder, and then I noticed something that made me stop dead. The tracks I had been following were now coming from ahead, facing me. I stared, confused, until the meaning landed. At some point while I moved forward, something had walked toward me, on the same path, and I had not heard it. I remember whispering, "No," just that, "No." The cold had turned to sweat under my jacket. I began walking back the way I came, fast now, trying not to look left or right. But I could feel it. The certainty of being observed had become almost physical, like heat on skin. Then came the smell again, stronger. Wet fur, rot, something metallic underneath, and close, much too close. I turned my head, only slightly, toward a stand of black pines maybe 30 yards off the trail. There was a shape there, tall, still, too upright to be a bear, too broad in the shoulders to be a man. I could only see part of it between trunks, a suggestion more than a body. But I saw enough to know it was looking at me, and in that moment something inside me, some old animal part of the brain, understood before the rest of me did. I was not following tracks anymore. I had been led. And just as I took 1 step backward, meaning to run at last, I heard movement behind me too. Heavy, measured. Not one presence, 2. And I realized, with the last bit of daylight dying around me, I no longer knew which direction led out. I wish I could tell you I ran the moment I realized I'd been led. That instinct took over, and I did something brave or smart, or even merely human. Truth is, fear can make you stupid before it makes you fast. I stood there longer than I should have, halfway turned between 2 directions of terror, trying to force my mind to make sense of something my body had already accepted. One shape ahead, movement behind, the smell closing in. And the worst part wasn't that I thought I might die. It was the sick understanding that something out there had arranged this moment. That implication was heavier than fear. It carried intention. I still hear that in my head sometimes. Not a voice, an intention. I moved backward first, slow, careful, my boots barely lifting from the needle-covered ground. I kept my eyes on the dark shape between the pines, though even as I watched, it seemed less like a shape and more like an absence where the woods didn't behave right. It didn't shift like a person adjusting weight. It didn't sway like a branch in wind. It held still with a kind of patience I have never seen in anything wild. Then the sound behind me came again. One step, crunch. Another, crunch. Heavy enough to carry through the earth. I turned. Nothing visible. But something was moving just beyond what I could resolve, where tree trunks layered into blackness. My breathing had gone shallow. Every inhale tasted like wet bark and something spoiled. Then, absurdly, I thought of my brother. Not because he was there, because years earlier, when we were boys, he told me if you ever get lost in the woods, don't run blind. Stop. Find direction. Panic kills faster than what you're afraid of. I tried to obey that memory. Tried. I looked for the service road, for some marker, a broken stump I remembered, a washout in the trail. But the ground had become unfamiliar. I had wandered farther while following those prints than I understood. Every direction looked like every other. And then I heard breathing, close enough to hear moisture in it, not mine. I bolted. No decision, no plan, just movement. I crashed through brush instead of staying to the path, branches snapping at my face. My pack caught on something and ripped loose. I left it. I heard my own footfalls, ragged and loud, and behind me, something keeping pace. Not always visible, but there, parallel. I would hear it to my right for several seconds, then suddenly nothing, and then movement to my left, as if it was circling while I ran. I remember hitting a slope I hadn't seen and sliding hard, smashing my knee against stone. Pain shot up my leg so bright, I nearly blacked out. I scrambled up anyway, half limping now. Then I heard something I had not heard before. A vocalization. Low. Not a growl exactly, more like a rough, chuffing exhale, almost amused. I know how that sounds, I know. But that was worse than any roar would have been. A roar is threat. This sounded like confidence, like it wasn't exerting itself. I ran harder. The woods blurred. My lungs burned. Cold air cut my throat raw. Somewhere in the chaos, I realized I was moving downhill, toward a creek bed I vaguely remembered crossing on previous hikes. If I could find water, maybe I could orient myself. That thought kept me going. Then I broke into a narrow clearing and saw moonlight on shallow water. Relief hit me so suddenly, my knees weakened. I stumbled into the creek, boots soaking instantly. Water climbed over my ankles, ice cold, shocking enough to sharpen me. And then, silence. Complete. The movement behind me stopped. I turned slowly in the creek, chest heaving. Nothing moved at the tree line. Nothing. Just dark trunks. I stood there maybe 30 seconds, maybe 3 minutes. Time had become elastic. But I remember thinking maybe I'd lost it. Maybe the creek confused its scent. Maybe whatever had followed me was gone. That small hope lasted until I noticed the tracks in the mud along the opposite bank. Fresh, already there, waiting where I was headed. I cannot explain what happened in my mind then. Something almost broke, because fear expects pursuit. It can process being chased. But to realize something reached your destination before you, that fractures reason. I backed away from the bank, and that's when I heard a voice, my name, soft, from the trees. I dropped to one knee so hard I splashed water. I had told no one I was out there, no one. Yet I heard my name, low and almost conversational, spoken in a voice that sounded enough like my brother's to freeze my blood. Come on. That's what it said, or what I heard. I screamed then, not from courage, pure animal panic. I splashed back through the creek and ran the opposite direction, up the far embankment, not caring where it led. I think I was crying by then. I'm not sure. My face was wet. Could have been sweat. Could have been tears. At some point I saw an old hunting blind elevated between two trees, half rotted but standing. I climbed the ladder so fast I nearly fell, hauled myself into the platform and pressed against the back wall, clutching a rusted bolt as if it were a weapon. I stayed there in darkness, listening. Minutes passed, then an hour maybe, I don't know. At some point I heard footsteps below, circling, deliberate, slow. Once around, then again. Wood creaked under my shifting weight, and I nearly sobbed, thinking it heard me move. Then came a sound directly beneath the blind, sniffing, long, wet, followed by one scrape against the ladder. Then another, as if testing it. I held my breath until my chest spasmed. And then, a voice again. Not my brother this time, my own, whispering from below. Don't look down. I bit my hand to keep from making noise. I know what memory does under stress. I know people hallucinate. I have argued this with myself for years. But memory doesn't explain what happened next. Because after maybe a minute of silence, something heavy climbed one rung of that ladder. Just one. Then stopped, waiting, as if it knew I was listening, as if it wanted me to imagine the next rung. I sat there shaking so hard the whole blind trembled, and just when I thought it would climb again, a sound rose in the distance, a long, mournful howl. Then another answering farther off, not one, more, and whatever was beneath me moved away. Not because it feared them, because I think it had been called, and for the first time that night, hiding in that rotting blind, while things spoke in the dark, I understood I may not have wandered into one animal's territory. I may have crossed into something like a pack. People ask why I didn't climb down once whatever was beneath the blind moved off. They assume relief brings action. Sometimes relief paralyzes you worse than fear. I stayed curled in that rotting platform because the thought of touching that ladder again felt more dangerous than starving. I kept imagining hands on the rungs, not paws, hands, long-fingered and wrong. I know that detail sounds impossible, but once your mind accepts one impossible thing, it starts noticing others. That was the beginning of something changing in me, not belief, something more primitive, a surrender to what my senses were reporting, even when reason refused. The howls faded deeper into the timber, but their echoes seemed to hang between the trees long after the sound itself was gone. I listened until my ears hurt from straining. Every tiny noise became enormous. A branch settling, water moving somewhere unseen, leaves skittering in little circles when the wind stirred. Ordinary things turned suspicious, and under all of it, I waited for the ladder to creak again. It didn't. Not for a long while. At some point, clouds shifted, and a little moonlight slipped through the gaps in the blind's warped boards. Enough for me to see dust hanging in the air. Enough to see my hands shaking. My right palm was bloody where my teeth had broken skin when I bit it. I remember thinking how absurd that was. I might be hunted by something I could not explain, and I was staring at a bite mark I gave myself. The mind clings to small things when the big thing is too large. I don't know when exhaustion overtook terror, but sometime deep in the night, I must have drifted. Not sleep exactly, more like collapsing inward while still half aware. And I dreamed, or thought I did. I was back on the old service road at dusk, following those prints again. Only this time they were my prints, and something else was following mine. I heard breathing at my neck, then a whisper. You kept coming. I woke choking on my own breath, and dawn had begun. Gray light filtered through the trees. Birds had returned. That sound nearly made me cry. Birds, ordinary life. I waited another hour before moving. My body was stiff with cold. My knee had swollen. But daylight gave me a courage darkness had taken. I crawled to the edge of the blind and looked down. Nothing below. No animal, no tracks visible from above, just leaf litter. The ladder held when I climbed down, though every rung felt like betrayal. On the ground I found something snagged on a splinter near the base. Hair. Dark, coarse, longer than dog fur. I stared at it too long, then left it there. I should have taken it. Proof. Evidence. But part of me feared carrying anything from that place. I started walking east by the sun, using the creek as reference, trying to find the main trail system. For maybe an hour, things felt almost sane. Then I found my pack, sitting upright beside a tree, zipper closed, exactly where I had dropped it while running. That stopped me colder than any howl, because I had torn free from it at full sprint. It should have been wherever I lost it in the brush. Instead, it looked placed, presented. I did not want to touch it, but my water was inside. I opened the top flap. My bottle was gone. In its place was a deer vertebra, clean, white, laid on top of my map. I dropped the pack so hard, everything spilled. I wish I could say I kept thinking rationally after that, but fear became anger for a while. Raw, stupid anger. Because something had touched my things. Something had made a gesture, and gestures mean thought. I remember shouting into the woods, "Show yourself then." Even now I hate remembering that, because there was a long pause after I yelled, as if the woods considered me. Then from somewhere unseen, a single knock, talk, answering me, mocking me. I ran again, but not blind this time, purposeful, toward where I believed the old marked trail should be. And sometime near midday, I found orange paint blazed on a tree. Human sign. I almost collapsed from relief. I followed those marks fast, stumbling, muttering to myself like a fool. I could smell smoke at one point, and thought maybe campers were near. Then I heard footsteps behind me, matching mine, one beat late. I stopped. They stopped. I walked. They walked. I spun. Nothing. That was when denial finally died. Whatever had happened in darkness was not over in daylight. I started speaking out loud just to hear a human voice. "You're almost out. Keep moving. Don't turn around. Don't turn." Something whistled right behind my ear. Not loud. Soft. Like someone trying to get a dog's attention. I jerked so hard, I fell sideways into brush. And as I scrambled up, I saw it clearly for the first time. Across a shallow ravine, standing among saplings, tall as the low branches, lean but heavy through the shoulders, arms too long, head like a wolf's silhouette, but wrong in the muzzle, eyes fixed on me, not glowing, just catching light. It did not lunge, did not bare teeth. It watched, and there was something in that stillness worse than aggression, recognition, as if it knew me now, as if crossing paths had become relationship. I don't know how long we stared, maybe seconds, maybe forever. Then it tilted its head, a small, curious motion, almost gentle, and stepped behind a tree. Gone. I ran until I hit the main trail and found two hikers near the parking area. I must have looked insane. Mud to my waist, blood on my hand, talking too fast. They asked if I fell. I nearly told them everything. Nearly. But when I looked back toward the tree line while they spoke, I saw far beyond them at the edge of shadow, something upright between two trunks. watching me leave. And I understood with a sickness I can still taste. I had not escaped because I outsmarted it. I had been allowed to go. And that thought followed me home. But what followed me home was worse. People think the woods end at the tree line, that whatever lives out there stays bound to ravines and ridges and places human lights don't reach. I believed that too. I needed to believe it, because once I made it home, showered off the mud, bandaged my hand, and locked my apartment door, I tried to convince myself the terror had belonged to the forest, that crossing asphalt had broken whatever held me in its world. That lie lasted one night. I barely slept. Every time I drifted off, I heard the knock. Talk, talk, talk. Sometimes in dreams. Sometimes, I swear, from somewhere in the apartment. At around 3 in the morning, I woke because I thought I smelled wet fur. I sat upright in bed, listening. Refrigerator hum. Traffic far below. Radiator ticking. Normal sounds. I almost laughed at myself. Then something moved in the hall outside my door. A slow footstep. I froze. Another. Then silence. My apartment building was old. Neighbors came and went at odd hours. I knew that. I knew it. But what made the skin lift on my arms was what came next. 3 knocks. On my door. Slow. Measured. Exactly the same rhythm. Talk, talk, talk. I did not answer. I did not breathe. After maybe a minute, I forced myself to creep to the peephole. The hallway was empty. No one there. I opened the door anyway, because fear makes you do contradictory things. Nothing. Just dim yellow hall light and stale carpet smell. But on the floor outside my door, mud. 2 partial prints. Long, narrow, drying. I slammed the door and shoved a chair under the knob, like that would matter. I didn't go back to the woods after that. For weeks. I told no one. Who tells a story like that without hearing themselves sound broken? Instead, I tried living normally. Work, groceries, bills. But little things kept happening. A smell in stairwells. Movement in reflections. Once, walking to my car at dusk, I saw what looked like a tall figure at the far end of the lot, standing beside a light pole. I blinked, and it was gone. You can call that trauma. I did. For a while. Then my brother called. I hadn't told him anything yet. He said, casual as weather, "You been messing around out by the old service roads?" I felt my throat close. I asked why. Long pause. Then he said he found tracks near his cabin. Tracks he thought looked almost human. And before I could answer, he laughed a little, dry, nervous, and said, "You remember those stories Dad used to tell?" I remembered. Stories I'd dismissed as old man nonsense. Don't answer voices in the timber. If something knocks, don't knock back. Never follow what steps off the trail and waits for you to notice. I'd forgotten those words until that moment, or maybe I had buried them. A week later, I drove to my brother's cabin. I told myself I was going to confess everything. Instead, I arrived and said almost nothing. Cowardice can look a lot like restraint. The cabin sat near the edge of national forest, more isolated than I liked now. But being with him calmed me. We cooked cheap food, drank coffee too strong, joked a little. For a few hours, I felt human again. Then after dark, we heard something outside, circling, slow. My brother looked at me. I looked at him. Neither of us spoke. Then, knock. Not on the door, on the outer wall. Wood on wood, moving. A knock on one side, then another farther along the cabin, as if something walked the perimeter, tapping as it went. My brother whispered, "Don't open it." The way he said it told me he already knew fear I had not explained. We sat in silence while it circled. At one point, something brushed the window. Not hard, like fur dragging glass. I could hear my brother breathing too fast. Then, after maybe 20 minutes, a voice outside, my voice, calling his name. He grabbed my arm so hard it hurt, because I had not spoken. I saw in his face the same realization I felt in the blind. Mimicry. Whatever this was, it borrowed. And that tore something loose between us. Because once two people share the impossible, denial weakens. Near dawn, the sounds stopped. When we finally stepped outside, frost covered the yard. And in the frost, tracks. A line of them, circling the cabin. And another line, smaller, running beside the first. My brother stared too long, then said something I wish he never had. There were never just one. I asked what he meant. He didn't answer. Instead, he walked to the tree line and crouched. There, tied around a low branch with a strip of bark, hung something that made my stomach fold. My missing water bottle from the day in the woods. I had not told him about that. I had not told anyone. He looked back at me, pale as ash. And in that look I saw he was hiding history. Old history. Family history. Things Dad had hinted at, and we laughed off. I demanded he tell me what he knew. He said, "Not here." That phrase, "not here." I still hear it, because before he could say more, from the timber behind him came a whistle, soft, the same one I'd heard behind my ear on the trail. My brother went rigid, and very quietly, without turning around, he said, "It found you because it knew our blood." Then something moved in the trees behind him, fast, too fast, and he looked over his shoulder and screamed. I have replayed that scream more than any other sound in my life, not because it was loud, because of what was in it. Recognition. My brother did not scream like a man startled by an animal. He screamed like a man seeing something return. I ran to him before I even understood I was moving. He stumbled backward from the tree line, hit the ground hard, scrambling on elbows like a child trying to escape fire. I grabbed his coat and dragged him toward the cabin porch while he kept staring over my shoulder. I made the mistake of looking. Something moved between the trunks, not clearly enough to resolve, but large, pacing, keeping just beyond full view. My brother kept saying one word, "Inside," over and over. Inside. We slammed the cabin door, shoved the bolt, and stood there bent over breathing like we'd outrun a train. I demanded he tell me what he saw. He only shook his head. Then he did something I had never seen him do. He pulled down the old tin box from above the stove, the one that used to hold Dad's papers. Inside were folded notes, old maps, a photograph. He handed me the photograph first. Black and white. Our father as a young man beside two other men, near a logging truck. And in the tree line behind them, half obscured, a tall, dark shape. I thought it was a smudge, until I realized all three men in the picture were looking at it. Not the camera, it. I looked up at my brother. He said Dad wasn't telling stories, he was warning us. Then he unfolded one of the maps, old survey lines marked through forest tracts I knew, including the service road where I found the tracks. Certain areas circled in pencil. Places Dad wrote never cross after dusk. Places he called corridors. I asked what that meant. My brother said he didn't know fully, only that Dad believed some territories weren't territories at all. Routes, travel lines, used over generations, and our family had crossed them before. I remember feeling angry, not scared, angry, because if any of this was true, why hide it? Why leave me ignorant? My brother answered before I asked. Because saying a thing out loud can make it easier for it to find shape in you. That sounded insane. And yet after everything, I could not dismiss it. We spent the day barricading windows. Yes, I know how that sounds. Two grown men nailing boards over cabin glass in daylight because of something half seen. But fear had become practical. Toward evening, my brother finally admitted there was one more thing. When we were children, I went missing once. For 3 hours. I have no memory of it. I thought I'd wandered. He said they found me near the old service road, standing barefoot, speaking to the trees. I told him he was lying. He swore he wasn't. And then he said words I did not want to hear. You started it again when you followed the tracks. Started, not triggered, not encountered, started, as if some old, unfinished contact had resumed. That night the knocking came before dark, not outside, under the floorboards. 3 knocks, then silence, then scraping beneath the cabin, moving room to room. I held a shotgun Dad left behind, though I knew if something wanted in, a 12-gauge meant little. Around midnight, the generator died. Cabin went black, pure black, and from outside voices began. Not many. 2, maybe 3, using familiar tones. My mother's voice, dead 10 years, calling softly through the wall. Then my own voice again. Then my brother's, each separated by long silences, as if waiting for response. My brother whispered, "No matter what you hear, do not answer." I asked him how he knew. He said because Dad answered once. That sentence hit like ice. Before I could ask what happened. Glass shattered in the back room. We ran, not toward it, away, out the front door into freezing dark. I know how irrational that sounds, fleeing into the woods from what stalked the woods. But panic chooses movement over logic. We ran downslope toward an old fire tower trail my brother knew. Something crashed behind us, keeping pace. Then ahead, a shape crossed the trail. Not 1, 2. One larger, one moving low and fast. We veered off path, branches whipping our faces. My brother limping now, breathing ragged. Then he grabbed me hard and shoved me behind a fallen log. We dropped flat, listened. Heavy footfalls passed within yards, slow, searching. I could smell that rot, wet fur odor again, closer than ever. My brother's mouth near my ear, he whispered, "There's only one way out." I asked, "What?" He pointed up slope. The old fire tower. High steel structure, abandoned decades. He said they don't like open exposure. I asked how he knew that, too. He said because Dad climbed it once. That word again. Once. Everything in our family seemed built around once. We crawled until we could run again. And after what felt like forever, through the trees. The silhouette of the fire tower rose, black against stars. Salvation, I thought. We hit the ladder and started climbing, fast as terror could move us, metal freezing our hands. I climbed above my brother, maybe 30 feet up. He stopped. I looked down. He was staring into darkness below, not moving. I hissed, "Climb," he whispered, too calm. "It's on the ladder." I looked, and below his boots, on the steel rungs beneath him, a hand, wrapped around the metal, not his, long, dark, climbing up toward him. There is a point where fear goes so far it becomes strangely clear. People imagine panic as chaos, but sometimes terror sharpens everything until the world turns painfully precise. I remember every detail of that moment on the fire tower. Frost on the rung near my face, my brother's breath ghosting white, the faint metallic groan of the structure swaying in wind, and that hand, wrapped around the rung below him, long fingers, knuckles too pronounced, dark hair along the wrist, moving, climbing. I shouted his name. He jerked upward one rung, then another, scrambling now, all calm gone. Something below struck the ladder hard. The whole tower shuddered. I climbed faster, hands slipping, palms tearing. We reached the platform near the top and hauled ourselves over the rail in a tangle of limbs and breath. For 3 seconds I believed we'd made it. Then the ladder rang. Clang, clang, something ascending. My brother lunged for the rusted maintenance hatch, a half-broken panel leading into the tiny lookout cab. We forced ourselves inside and slammed it shut, though the latch barely held. The cab stank of old iron and bird droppings, broken windows, wind cutting through, and beneath us, clang, clang, steady, approaching. I backed against the wall with a shotgun raised at the hatch. My brother whispered, "Don't fire unless it breaches." I asked why. He said because if there are more below, the shot tells them where we are. More. Always more. The climbing stopped just outside the hatch. Silence. Then a slow drag across metal, as if claws or fingers traced the roof, circling us. I thought my heart would burst. Then came a sound at the broken window, a sniff, right beside my face. Something was at the outer ledge, at that height, holding there. Impossible. And then, very softly, my father's voice from outside the glass. "Boys?" I made a sound I've never made before or since. My brother covered my mouth. Tears were running down his face, and I had not even realized he was crying. The voice came again. "Open." Then a low chuckle. Not my father. Something wearing the shape of memory. Hours passed like that, or maybe less. Time had no meaning. Sometimes scraping overhead, sometimes silence so complete it felt staged. At one point we heard movement descending the ladder. Then another set ascending, a relay, like shifts. I understood then why exhaustion can be used as a weapon. Toward dawn, my brother told me what he had hidden. Dad didn't just answer a voice once. He went into the woods after hearing his own father call. Came back changed, withdrawn, obsessed with boundaries, knocks, old roots. And one winter, before I was born, something took my uncle. Officially a disappearance. In family memory, taken. I asked why, tell me now. He said because if we don't survive sunrise, you should know this didn't begin with you. There was love in that, and grief, and maybe farewell. When gray light finally bled into the sky, the sounds ceased. No scraping, no voices, nothing. We waited another hour, then opened the hatch. Empty ladder, empty forest below. Too empty. The kind of emptiness that feels arranged. We started down carefully. I went first. Halfway down I noticed my brother had stopped above me. I looked up. He was staring toward the tree line far below. I asked what. He said, almost wonderingly, "It wants one." Before I could understand, he shoved the shotgun down into my hands, then climbed back up. I screamed at him. He kept going, back to the top platform. I started after him, but he turned and shouted with a force I had never heard. "No!" That froze me. He stood at the rail, looking out over the woods as dawn spread, and he said words I still cannot forgive. It followed the bloodline. Let it stop with me. I begged him, cursed him, climbed toward him. Too late. Something moved at the base of the tower. Fast. He saw it. I saw his face change. And then he stepped off. Not slipped. Stepped. Dropped into open air. I heard the impact. I think I blacked out for seconds. When I looked down, he was gone. No body. Leaves moving. Nothing else. I climbed down screaming his name, stumbling into the trees around the tower. No blood, no drag marks, no sign. Just the shotgun in my shaking hands. And near the base of the ladder, one track, pressed deep in mud, fresh. Beside it, my brother's wedding ring. I searched until dark. Search teams came later. Dogs, helicopters, nothing. Missing. That was the official word, missing, as if absence explains anything. People ask if I think he sacrificed himself. I don't know. Sometimes I think he believed he could redirect something old. Sometimes I think he simply chose the fall over being taken another way. But what haunts me most is something I did not understand until weeks later. When I looked at the old photograph again, the three men by the logging truck, our father, two others, and in the tree line behind them. There were not one but two dark shapes, and one stood much smaller beside the larger. The same pattern as the tracks around the cabin. The same pattern crossing the trail. The same pattern I saw the night we ran. Which meant whatever took my brother at the tower may not have been the one that chose me first. And that meant the story was moving towards something even I still did not understand. Because 3 nights after his disappearance, I heard knocking under my bedroom floor. Grief does not arrive all at once. It leaks in through practical things, filling out missing person forms, repeating timelines to deputies who look tired before you finish, hearing your brother's name spoken in the past tense by people trying to be kind. That kind of pain almost helped at first, because it was ordinary pain, human pain. It gave me something recognizable to hold. But beneath it was another knowledge. He wasn't gone in any way the paperwork meant. He was somewhere inside a question I could not answer. 3 nights after the tower, when the knocking came from under my bedroom floor, I did not tell myself it was pipes. I got out of bed, stood barefoot on cold hardwood, and listened. Talk, 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 directly below me. Then a long scrape, moving under the boards toward the hallway. I should have run, called police, something. Instead, I followed the sound through my own apartment like a sleepwalker. It stopped at the front door. I opened it. The hall was empty, but on the floor sat the old tin box from the cabin, the one with Dad's papers. I had left it there after search teams combed the property. Yet there it was, at my door. I brought it inside with hands shaking so badly I nearly dropped it. Inside, beneath the maps I'd already seen, was an envelope sealed in wax, brittle with age, my name written in my father's hand. I broke the seal. There was 1 page. If you are reading this, one of 2 things happened. Either I failed to keep the boundary, or you crossed it yourself. I still know those words by heart. The letter said the things in those corridors do not simply hunt. They recognize. They follow lines of return, blood, memory, invitation. Dad believed the knocking, the mimicry, the tracks, these were tests, ways of getting consent, attention, response. He wrote never follow the 3rd knock, never answer a familiar voice outdoors after dark. And if one of us is taken, do not go back looking, because going back is how they make inheritance. I sat there until dawn, staring at that word, inheritance, like this was not random horror, but something transmitted. Then I found the last line. If your brother is gone, you will want to reach the old stone cut above Miller Ridge. Do not go. That, of course, is exactly where I went. People call that irrational, maybe. But grief mixed with guilt becomes a compass. I drove there the next morning. Miller Ridge was farther north, older forest, abandoned quarry roads, and a rock formation locals called the Stone Cut, a narrow split in a ridge where survey crews once passed through. Dad had circled it darkest on his map. I reached it near dusk. I know, dusk. Even writing that now feels like confession. The cut was exactly what I feared. Two walls of stone rising close on both sides, the path between them narrowing until daylight itself seemed pinched. And in the mud at the entrance, tracks, large, and smaller beside them, leading in. I followed, because by then I was past caution, past self-preservation, maybe. Inside the cut, the air turned colder than outside, unnaturally so. My breath smoked thick. Sound changed, too. Footsteps came back wrong, delayed, as if something walked half a beat behind me. Then I found markings on the rock. Old scratches, not random. Repeated symbols. 3 vertical lines crossed by 1 horizontal slash. Again and again. Like a warning or a count. At the far end, the passage widened into a bowl-shaped hollow ringed by stone. And in the center, my brother's jacket, folded, placed. I dropped to my knees, touched it. Cold, dry, no blood. Inside the pocket was a note, fresh paper, not weathered. I knew before opening it I should leave. I opened it anyway. Come alone next time. I heard movement immediately after, not in front, behind. At the mouth of the cut, blocking the way out. I turned. A shape stood there, clearer than ever before, tall, shoulders rolled forward, head slightly lowered, watching. And beside one leg, a smaller shape, moving low. Not a pup, something leaner, its eyes fixed on me too. I could not breathe. The larger one tilted its head, same as by the ravine. Recognition again. Then something happened I have never told many people. It stepped aside, opening the path, as if offering exit, not attacking, not advancing, offering. And I understood with cold certainty. This was communication, choice. I backed away, never turning, and left that hollow alive because it let me. I know that. I know it. But as I reached the entrance to the cut, I heard my brother's voice behind me. Not mimicry this time. Broken, weak. My name. I stopped. God help me, I stopped. Dad's warning, never follow the third knock, never answer a familiar voice. All of it battled in my head. Then I heard him again. Don't leave me. I almost turned. Almost. Instead I ran. And I have hated myself for that every day since. Because if that was real, I abandoned him. And if it was not real, then something knew exactly what wound to press. I thought that was the worst of it. I was wrong, because when I reached my truck, hands fumbling for keys, I saw something carved into the dust on my windshield. 3 vertical lines crossed by 1 slash. The same mark from the stone. And beneath it, traced by something sharp, a date, 3 days ahead. Tomorrow, when I tell you what happened on that date, you may stop believing me. I almost hope you do. The date carved into the windshield was a Thursday. I remember because I spent 2 days trying not to reach it. I did not go to work, did not answer calls. I locked every window, pushed furniture against doors, taped my father's letter to the kitchen wall, like scripture I was too late to learn. 3 days. I kept staring at that number, as if understanding it could change it. Part of me believed maybe the date meant death, mine. Part believed it meant an exchange, a meeting. And the part of me I trusted least believed it meant my brother might still be alive until then. That thought poisoned reason. On the second night, I heard no knocking, no footsteps, nothing. The silence felt deliberate, like pressure before a storm. Thursday came gray and wet, rain all morning. By noon, I had almost convinced myself the date was a cruelty with no event attached. Then the phone rang. Unknown number. I answered. Static. Then breathing. Then my brother's voice. Very faint. Miller Ridge. Line dead. I sat frozen with the phone in my hand for I don't know how long. You already know what I did. I drove. Rain made the roads shine black, wipers beating like a pulse. Every mile I argued with myself to turn around. I didn't. By the time I reached the stone cut, dusk again pressed through the trees. The same hour everything bad seemed to prefer, but there was something new. At the entrance, hanging from a low branch, my brother's wedding ring, swaying, as if recently placed. I took it, warm, not cold from rain, warm. I wish I did not remember that. Inside the cut, the symbols on stone seemed darker, almost wet. My flashlight shook in my hand. At the hollow, my brother stood in the center, alive. At least I thought so. Mud-streaked, thin, head lowered. I called his name. He looked up slowly and smiled. Wrong. Not broad, just enough to make every instinct recoil. I stopped walking. Something in me knew. I asked where he'd been. He said, learning the way through. His voice sounded like him, and didn't. I asked what happened at the tower. He tilted his head, that same motion, and said, "You shouldn't have left me." The flashlight nearly slipped from my hand. Then movement circled the rim of the hollow, plural, shapes pacing just beyond the beam. I backed away. My brother, or what wore him, took one step forward. I raised the shotgun I had brought, though I barely remembered carrying it. He looked at it almost curiously, then said words I have never escaped. It opens easier if invited. Invitation, Dad's letter, tests, consent. Suddenly everything aligned in one awful shape. The voices, the mimicry, the gestures. Not random haunting, negotiation. I ran. The shapes moved, not rushing, herding, driving me not toward the cut entrance, but deeper, through a narrow break in rock I had not seen before. I stumbled through and found a chamber beyond, natural stone overhead, earth floor, and in the center, bones. Animal, maybe not all animal, bound together with strips of hide around a standing frame like some obscene marker. I gagged. Behind me came footfalls. The brother shape entered the chamber, and behind him the larger one, clearer than ever, its muzzle slick with rain, eyes fixed on me with unbearable focus. No snarl, no rage, presence. The brother shape pointed to the bone frame and said, "Blood remembers." I fired. The shotgun blast in that chamber was thunder. The brother shape jerked sideways, or seemed to. The larger thing lunged. I ran through smoke and echo, slipping, falling, crawling toward daylight I barely saw. Something struck my back. Claws or stone, I don't know. Pain tore across my shoulder. I made the cut entrance and hurled myself into rain. Behind me came a howl so loud it shook in my ribs. I reached the truck, drove half blind, crashed a mile down the road into a ditch. They found me there near midnight, concussed, bleeding, delirious. That is the official record, but here is what never made the record. At the hospital after they stitched my shoulder, I woke in the dark to someone sitting beside the bed. I thought it was a nurse. Then I heard my brother whisper, "You missed the third knock." I jolted up, chair empty, but on the bedside tray, mud, and one coarse dark hair. I was discharged 2 days later. When deputies searched Miller Ridge after I told them, edited, not whole, they found no chamber, no bone structure, no signs of anyone, just the hollow, just stone, and one spent shotgun shell, mine, which meant I fired at something or someone. That question hollowed me. For months I wondered if I shot my brother, if I fled a wounded man in madness. That thought nearly killed me. Until winter, until the first snow, when I woke one morning and found tracks crossing the snow behind my apartment, large and smaller beside them, leading to my back door, none leading away. And scratched into the frost on the glass, 3 vertical lines crossed by 1 slash. Underneath it, a single word, home. That was when I understood the date at Miller Ridge had not marked an ending. It marked the moment something stopped waiting in the woods and began expecting me to come back willingly. After the word home appeared on my back door, something in me changed in a way I struggled to explain without sounding already lost. Up to that point, fear had still moved outward. I feared being followed, being watched, being taken. After that, the fear turned inward. I began to suspect the boundary my father wrote about was no longer only a place in the woods. It might exist in thought, in attention, in what I allowed myself to answer. That was the beginning of the numbness. I stopped sleeping normally, stopped trusting ordinary sequences of life. Morning felt staged. Conversations sounded thin, like people speaking through paper walls. I would be halfway through buying groceries and forget why I was standing there. I would hear a whistle in traffic noise, catch wet fur rot where there was only rain on pavement. I knew trauma could do that. I read about hypervigilance, hallucination, dissociation. I wanted those explanations, wanted them desperately. But then the knocks began returning in patterns. Not every night, just enough to keep certainty impossible. 3 knocks in heating pipes, 3 taps against a window 20 floors up, where nothing should touch glass. 3 dull sounds from inside walls when storms rolled through. Never enough for proof, always enough for dread. And with dread came guilt, because beneath all the fear was one thought, repeating until it became prayer and punishment both. I left my brother. I left him at the tower. I left him in the stone cut. Whether those were tricks or chances, I left. That thought drove me back to Dad's maps again and again. I began tracing the circled corridors, comparing survey lines, disappearances, old logging routes, county records. Obsession can wear the clothes of research. I see that now. And the more I looked, the more one pattern emerged. Every marked place fed, in one way or another, toward a tract of old-growth forest beyond Miller Ridge, unlogged because of unstable terrain. At the center of all the lines, a basin. No name on modern maps, but on Dad's paper, written in pencil, Return Hollow. I stared at those words for an hour. Return. Not den, not lair. Return. As if going there completed something. I knew I should have burned the map. Instead, I packed food, a flashlight, rope, the shotgun, and drove north before dawn. You may call that surrender. Maybe it was. Maybe I'd been walking toward that choice since the first track. The hike took most of a day. Snowmelt underfoot, cold mist hanging low. The deeper I went, the less birds I heard. I noticed that. Always the birds first. By late afternoon, I reached a rise overlooking the basin. Return Hollow. And I knew before stepping down that my father had feared this place for a reason. The basin was almost perfectly ringed by stone, and old trees leaning inward as though listening. In the center stood a dead white trunk, split by lightning. And around it, tracks. So many they churned the earth. Large, small, crossing generations of mud, roots worn by repetition, corridors, real. I should have run. Instead, I walked into the hollow. At the dead trunk, tied with old strips of bark and newer things too, cloth, rusted trinkets, bones, I found one object hanging by wire. My brother's watch. Stopped at the hour he vanished. I broke then, dropped to my knees, wept harder than I had since childhood. All the numbness cracked open. And through that grief I said aloud, "What do you want?" I did not mean to, but once spoken, the question hung there like offering. And from the trees, movement. They emerged without rush. One, then the smaller beside it, then farther back, others I only sensed, watching. The large one stepped into open ground. Close enough now I saw scars in its fur, old wounds, age. Its eyes held mine, and I swear there was no hatred there, only terrible attention. Then something impossible happened. It turned its head toward the trees opposite me, and from shadow, my brother walked out. I know what you think. I know. I thought I had finally broken too. But he came slowly, thin as before, older somehow in the face, and stopped yards away. I asked if he was real. He said, "As much as you are." That answer still unsettles me more than if he'd vanished. I asked if they took him. He said no. I came back. Came back. Return. The word in the basin. The word home. Everything circling that same idea. I asked why. He looked at the large one before answering. Because Dad was wrong about one thing. They don't only take, they keep what crosses, if it survives. I told him that was madness. He said maybe. Then he asked the question that cut deepest. Why did you follow the tracks the first day? I opened my mouth to say curiosity, loneliness, stupidity, but none felt complete. Because the truth was, I had felt drawn. Even before fear. Drawn. He nodded, as if I had answered aloud, then said, "That's the invitation. Not given by them, by something in us." I wanted to reject it, to call it delusion. But standing there with grief, guilt, memory, and those impossible watchers fixed on me, rejection felt thin. My brother stepped closer, said he could come with me, or I could stay. Said there was no force left now, only choosing. Choice again, always choice. And then the large one struck the dead trunk once with its hand. A hard, resonant knock. Talk. A second. Talk. My blood turned to ice. The third knock. The thing Dad warned never to follow. The third did not come. It waited. For me. Understanding arrived all at once. The third knock was never theirs. It was ours. The answer we give. The step we take. The consent. I backed away. My brother watched without anger, maybe with sadness. I said, "Come with me." He smiled, human this time, or human enough, and said, "I already answered." Then I turned and walked out of Return Hollow, while the third knock remained unmade. I did not run, did not look back. That was 10 years ago. I have not returned. I have not seen my brother again. At least, not in daylight. But sometimes in winter, when snow falls heavy, I find tracks at the edge of the yard, large, and smaller beside them, never crossing closer than the tree line, as if honoring a boundary remade. I married once since then. Tried building a life shaped more by ordinary things than old fear. Some days I succeed. Most days I live with ambiguity. Was my brother alive in any sense I understand? Did trauma dress wilderness in myth? Did I stand in a basin speaking to grief itself? I do not know. That is the haunted closure no one likes. No certainty, only the weight of what happened. But there is one thing I have never told until now. Last autumn, after years of silence, I woke before dawn because I heard 3 knocks. Not on the door, inside a dream. Talk, talk. I waited for the 3rd. It did not come. Instead, I heard my brother's voice, distant as wind through timber. You can still answer. I have thought about that every day since. Because part of me, some dark, lonely, unfinished part, still wonders what waits in return hollow. Wonders whether blood remembers. Wonders whether what we call haunting is sometimes invitation unresolved. And if one day I disappear, if they say, hiker missing, presumed dead, if some deputy folds a report and closes a file, do not believe the file. And if you ever find long, narrow tracks stepping off a trail, pausing as if waiting for you to notice, do not follow. Because I did. And even after refusing the 3rd knock, some nights, when the house settles and the wind hits the walls just right, I still hear something under the floorboards, waiting for me to finish it.